The legend of Hollow Hill, Hollow Hill. Just the name sent shivers down your spine. It stood alone, overlooking the town, dark and brooding, sinister. Locals whispered tales, stories of people venturing up never to return. They said it was cursed. One crisp autumn evening, four friends dared to challenge the legend. There was Max, the fearless leader, Emily the skeptic, Ben, the nervous one, and Chloe, always up for a thrill. They laughed off the stories as superstition. They would conquer Hollow Hill. The dare. The sun was setting as they approached the foot of the hill. Shadows stretched, twisting like gnarled fingers. A cold wind whipped around them, carrying a low, mournful howl. Ben shivered. "Maybe we should come back tomorrow?" he squeaked. Max laughed, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. "Scared, Ben?" Chloe scoffed. "Don't be such a chicken." Emily, ever the pragmatist, consulted her phone. "There's no signal here. Let's just get this over with." And so, with a mixture of bravado and trepidation, they began their ascent. The Shadow of the Hill. It was a name that sent chills down the spines of those who dared to speak it. The hill stood tall, a silent sentinel against the night sky, its shadow stretching out like a dark omen. The climb was steeper than it looked. Each step felt like a battle against the earth itself. The teenagers, armed only with flashlights, struggled to find their footing on the uneven path. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, the weight of the night pressing down on them. The air grew colder, the light fading rapidly. The once vibrant forest was now a shadowy maze, the trees blending into the darkness. The mist began to rise, wrapping around them like a cold, damp shroud. It was as if the hill itself was alive, breathing out a chilling fog that seeped into their very bones. The trees, twisted and ancient, loomed over the path, their branches like skeletal arms reaching out. They seemed to whisper secrets of the past, tales of those who had ventured here and never returned. The path was narrow, winding through the gnarled trees that seemed to close in on them with every step. The wind seemed to whisper, carrying unintelligible words that sent shivers down their spines. It was a sound that was both familiar and foreign, like a forgotten memory trying to resurface. The teenagers huddled closer together, their flashlights flickering as if the batteries were being drained by the very air around them. "Did you hear that?" Ben whispered, his eyes wide with fear. His voice was barely audible, swallowed by the oppressive darkness. He strained to listen, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs magnified in the silence. "Hear what?" Max snapped, his bravado starting to waver. He tried to sound confident, but the quiver in his voice betrayed him. The darkness seemed to amplify their fears, turning every shadow into a potential threat. But even he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. Something felt wrong. The air was thick with tension, every instinct screaming at them to turn back. But they pressed on, driven by a mix of curiosity and stubbornness. The hill seemed to press down on them, a palpable sense of dread seeping into their bones. It was as if the very ground beneath their feet was warning them, urging them to leave. But they were too far gone, too deep into the shadow of the hill to turn back now. The journey had only just begun, and the true terror was yet to reveal itself. The woods whisper. Deeper they ventured, the path disappearing beneath a carpet of decaying leaves. The woods were silent now, but it was an oppressive silence, heavy with unseen eyes. Chloe stumbled, her hand brushing against something cold and damp. She recoiled with a gasp, a moss-covered headstone half buried in the undergrowth. Emily brushed away the dirt, revealing an inscription. "Here lies the soul of Jacob Crane, lost to the curse of Hollow Hill." A chill ran down her spine. The legends were true. They were in danger. Panic began to set in. They had to get out of there. But as they turned to retrace their steps, they realized with horror they were lost. The path had vanished, swallowed by the encroaching darkness. The wind picked up again, this time carrying a chilling laughter that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then they saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees ahead. Hope surged through them. "Help!" Max shouted, his voice hoarse with terror. "Can anyone hear us?" But the only answer was the mournful sigh of the wind. The light led them to a clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, its windows dark, the door hanging open precariously. It looked abandoned, but the light... Cautiously they approached, their steps echoing in the silence. As they drew closer, the light flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. A blood-curdling scream split the night. Chloe! Max fumbled for his flashlight, his heart pounding in his chest. The beam flickered to life, illuminating Chloe's terrified face. She pointed a trembling finger at the cabin door. "It's locked!" she gasped. "Something locked us in." Panic surged through them. They rattled at the door, but it wouldn't budge. They were trapped. The temperature plummeted, and a foul odor filled the air like something rotting. And then the whispers started again, soft at first, then growing louder, swirling around them, taunting them. "Don't listen," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "It's trying to scare us." But her words were lost in the cacophony of whispers, growing louder, more insistent. And then, from the darkest corner of the cabin, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared, watching them. The eyes vanished as quickly as they had appeared, but the terror remained. They were no longer alone in the cabin. Something was with them, something dark and malevolent. The air grew heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Shadows danced at the edge of their vision, taking on grotesque shapes. Max, his bravado finally gone, sank to the floor, his face buried in his hands. "We're going to die here," he mumbled. Chloe began to cry softly, her shoulders shaking. Only Emily remained calm, her mind racing, searching for a way out. But what could they do against a curse? Suddenly, Emily noticed something. Her eyes widened as she strained to see in the dim light, her breath catching in her throat. A faint scratching sound coming from the back of the cabin. It was barely audible, but in the oppressive silence, it was unmistakable. She crept towards it, her heart pounding like a drum in her chest. Each step felt like an eternity, the floorboards creaking under her weight. There, hidden beneath a pile of rotting wood, was a small window. It was grimy and covered in cobwebs, but it was a potential escape route. It was their only chance. The realization hit her like a bolt of lightning, filling her with a renewed sense of urgency and hope. "Help me with this," she whispered, motioning for the others to help her move the wood. Her voice was barely audible, but the desperation in her tone was clear. Together, they managed to pry open the window. It groaned in protest, but finally gave way, revealing a narrow opening to the outside world. It was a tight squeeze, but one by one they scrambled through, Emily pushing them from behind. Each person who made it through gave her a glimmer of hope. Just as she was about to follow, a cold hand clamped down on her arm. The touch was icy, sending a shiver down her spine. She screamed, kicking out wildly, and felt the grip loosen. Her heart raced as she fought with every ounce of strength she had. Then she was scrambling through the window, running blindly into the night. The cold air hit her face, but she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The forest loomed ahead, dark and foreboding, but it was her only hope for freedom. They didn't stop running until they were far from the clearing, far from the cabin, far from the cursed hill. The night was pitch black, the only light coming from the sliver of the moon that peeked through the dense canopy of trees. Their hearts pounded in their chests, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they pushed their bodies to the limit. They collapsed on the ground, gasping for breath, their lungs burning from the exertion. The forest floor was cold and damp, but they didn't care. They were just grateful to be away from that dreadful place, even if only for a moment. Their bodies shaking with terror and exhaustion, they tried to make sense of what had just happened. But as they caught their breath, a chilling realization dawned on them. They were only 3. The group had started with 4. Max was gone. Panic set in as they called his name, their voices echoing through the silent woods. "Max! Max, where are you?" they shouted, their voices growing more desperate with each passing second. Their voices hoarse with fear, they continued to call out, hoping against hope that he would answer. But there was no response, only the oppressive silence of the forest. The mournful sigh of the wind was the only sound that reached their ears, a haunting reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. The trees seemed to close in around them, their gnarled branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. And then, just as they were about to give up hope, they heard it. The chilling laughter that seemed to echo through the trees, a sinister sound that sent shivers down their spines. It was a sound they would never forget, a sound that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. Max was gone, claimed by the Curse of Hollow Hill, a curse that had taken so many before him. The hill was a place of darkness and despair, a place where the lost souls of the past lingered, waiting to claim their next victim. Just like all the others, Max had become another victim of the hill's malevolent power. The teenagers knew they had to leave, but the memory of that night would stay with them forever, a constant reminder of the horrors that lay hidden in the shadows of Hollow Hill. The next morning, the sun rose over Hollow Hill, casting long shadows across the town below. The townsfolk whispered about the missing teenagers, shaking their heads sadly. Another tragedy, another victim of the curse. But for Emily, Ben, and Chloe, the nightmare was far from over. They had escaped with their lives, but they were forever changed, haunted by the memory of Max and by the chilling knowledge that some places are best left undisturbed. For the curse of Hollow Hill was real, and it would continue to claim its victims as long as the hill stood.